Hi, this is the Ignoramus's Guide to Surviving Humanity. I'm Ileana Chan,
I'm
and this
Wei
is.
Chan.
So today we are having a conversation with Jess Wu, who
Mhm.
is an activist, an organizer. Would you say that's like the correct terminology?
Yeah, I
Has
think
a
so.
background in law, is
Mhm.
an extremely intelligent, articulate, and interesting person. But what else would you add to that?
Um, I would say that she is also very good at not hiding from controversy and speaks her mind. And challenges existing kind of leftist narratives, which I think is great.
Hello!
Hey, Jess.
Good morning. Good morning.
We were just talking about you. Funny coincidence.
I hope lovely things. I can't take anything negative this morning, so I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
Oh no, you're in the wrong place.
I'm just kidding. Come for me.
Okay. Cool. So we did a little introduction of you and your, well, I would say not really covered your accomplishments. We just sort of heaped sort of vague praise on you. So is there anything that you kind of want to start with as in your own intro?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure if I've accomplished anything yet, but definitely trying. Yeah, I would just say that I'm a part-time activist, advocate for things that I care about. Um, yeah, I think on my own, I try to be educated, and I try to explain some concepts to folks who might need help. And then, yeah, with an organization in New York City called Riders for Rights, yeah, we try to help the community over there, and also pushing for candidates that we want to see to enact the policies that we want to see.
Oh, that's so interesting. I want to ask you a little bit more about Writers for Rights later, but I just have to jump in there and ask you about who are the candidates right now for New York mayor that you're excited about? Are there
Unfortunately,
any?
Unfortunately, yeah, I mean, so right now we've been focused on the city council races. So I've not been super personally involved, but we have a whole team who've done a ton of dedicated work, putting out candidate surveys, and really asking the questions that we want them to answer, that we want to understand, right? Are they helping the community? Are they for abolition? Do they want less policing? Do they want to abolish ICE? So all these really pressing questions that really help the local communities over there. In terms of the mayoral race, that's a different level. And quite honestly, the politics at that level is quite different than the local level politics. There's much more money involved, much more funding involved, and just much more association, right, with like the larger Democratic Party, the Democratic machine. So while the local elections, the local city council elections can sometimes be turned by just a few hundred votes, it's much more difficult to influence the mayoral election. Plus, their policies are just really not what we are about. So it's very hard to to find a candidate that we really are passionate about. So that being said, we're after we do, I think the city council races, I think we're going to start looking more closely at the mayoral candidates. Although, like I said, right now we're not super excited. I don't think about them. I don't know if you saw, but the other day, a newspaper asked the candidates so far, how much do they think a house in Brooklyn
Oh
costs?
yeah, I saw
And
that. That was hilarious. I mean,
yeah, it would be hilarious if it wasn't, real and
yeah, it was,
affects
I
all of
mean, I
us.
think it was hilarious in terms of just how sad it is. Because he said in Brooklyn, he thought a median, and it's median, not
Mhm.
average. So I think there might be a little, difference with that. But he thought it was like, I think 90,000 or 100,000,
Yeah,
which is ridiculous. In Brooklyn, you wouldn't even be able to get like a shoebox for that
yeah,
amount.
yeah, like a trailer, or like a temporary storage solution probably. But yeah, so just it really shows how out of touch our politicians
Yeah,
are.
and just so that viewers know, because like they may not have lived in Brooklyn, so they don't know that the actual median house price is actually 900,000. So it's quite different from what he's thinking. Dollars, US dollars, for British people here.
What's that in pounds? What's that in proper stuff?
Improper stuff. That'd be around like
Okay.
700,000 pound
Yeah.
ish. Not good at math, but it's around that. Around that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's a lot. It's a lot. And that wouldn't be like a huge mansion, obviously. But so what are the main policies, do you think, that you're advocating for Riders for Rights? And do you think that they translate to being here in the UK?
I think so. I think in the time that I've been trying to educate myself as well, on the things that I'm speaking about. Obviously, that's quite important. Yeah, I think that everything that we talk about, and if we think about the abolitionists that we care about, like Angela Davis, and her organization Critical Resistance has been doing this work for a really long time. And as well as the kind of the Black writers that I really like, who talk about transformative justice and new ways of thinking about how we can support each other, and how at the community level, right, that we can actually come together.
What are the
And
writers that you
advocate for
really
things.
like? So that, what would you say is like a book?
Right now I've been reading a lot of I always get her name wrong, Adrienne Marie Brown, or Adrienne Marie Brown. One second. Yeah, Adrienne Marie Brown. She has a theory called, or she advocates for a theory called emergent strategies, which is, it's kind of aligned with our work at Riders for Rights. We are a flat organization. We don't have leadership. We do most things by consensus, and the things that we don't do by consensus, we essentially vote by consensus, say like this group of people can then make the decisions on behalf of us, because of their passion or their expertise. So yeah, so she writes a lot about groups organizing self-sufficiently, and kind of taking elements from nature where where folks, or even things like birds can come together, right, without kind of central leadership, and it's kind of goes with whatever that we're trying to do. So she's been pretty central, I think, to the work that we've been trying to do. And yeah, for myself at least, Angela Davis has been like a really big influence, just because I think that she speaks about things that are kind of more encompassing than just race, right, or Black liberation. I think now that we're at this stage, hopefully, of the movement, right, we're really thinking about intersectionality, right. How do we uplift the most marginalized, and that intersection is important to recognize and then advocate for, versus just I think there's the criticism of like the civil rights movement in the 60s, is that it was quite middle class focused. It was led by Black men who may have forgotten, or who may not have prioritized the needs of the more marginalized in their community. So ideally now folks are recognizing that, and then
That's so interesting,
really
because
bringing it
it's
on.
like I kind of feel well, this year I think there's just been like a lot more movies about, I guess, the civil rights. There's
Yeah, it's
certain
cool
like,
now.
yeah, it's cool now, and so there's a few that come to mind, just like from the Oscars. Judas and the Black Messiah was one about the Black Panther. And Black Panthers. And then there was the other one that was also released, it was Chicago, Trial of the Chicago 7. And I thought that was really interesting, because it just kind of, to me, showed, like, having lived in the US for the past 5 years and just coming back to the UK in November, it just kind of showed like that now we have a huge regression in terms of, one, for Chicago, trial of Chicago, trial of 7, something like that. Trial of Chicago 7, they actually showed that they used to have the names of like Vietnam vets, or people who had died, and we don't have that. So it's just like, in terms of, there's certain things that we've just regressed so far back. Like,
Yeah.
now there's no even acknowledgement of casualties. you know. And then in terms of, I think the Black Messiah, the other thing was just that it's what you were saying, the solidarity, the whole like, we have more in common with the white working man, which was basically something Fred Hampton, you know, was very
Yeah,
clear on.
I think what's interesting is that, you know, that class theory and that solidarity, that I think has been purposefully lost
Mhm.
or
Definitely.
erased, shall we say. So yeah, and obviously that was definitely there. You know, both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King had similar comments to say about class solidarity. And
Yeah, I'm
you know, towards
definitely.
towards the end, you know, I believe Martin Luther King did say, you know, it's yeah, he did want, he started advocating for more you know, equality amongst classes for sure.
And he acknowledged as well, like the funding of the military industrial complex,
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
it diverted money from the poverty fund, and
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
so I think that was like, I mean, again, that's another thing that it's like almost obviously there are people talking about it, but in the mainstream, that message is completely lost in terms
yeah.
of
And I think what's the distinction that I make, or that I've noticed myself, is that, you know, Black women in the movement, you know, Kathleen Cleaver, you know, she's been very prominent throughout her career, you know, ended up becoming a lawyer, things like that. Yeah, the Black women in those movements are the ones that who've consistently, you know, called attention to their struggles and their needs, right? Whereas, you know, it's not always been necessarily a public focus of the very visible Black male leaders, say, of the movement. And I think it's just, for me, that tells me that, you know, who do we listen to? Like, who do we look to guide us in our mission, you know, in the work that we do? And you know, for me, it's, you know, it's Black or Indigenous women, or like, or Black Indigenous, Black or Indigenous movements, you know, that are led, that I think are, give us kind of the blueprint, or at least give us the inspiration that we need, or to make sure that, you know, we are accounting for the needs of everybody, right? Because I think when we try to rise up in the past, you know, if we leave people behind, you know, we're not actually, we don't have liberation, right? We're not free until we're all free. So I think hopefully now there's at least I've seen much more people realize that the impact that it has, you know, when you ignore people that, you know. And then I think the more that you dig into the needs and the issues that, you know, people are facing, the more you recognize how interconnected they are. And I think now I'm sensing that, you know, some people start to feel that this is a global movement, you know, like whether it's Palestine, whether it's Colombia, whether it's Hong Kong, you know, it's there are central themes, right, of oppression that we're all really fighting against. And I think, you know, that kind of consciousness, that this is not just, you know, for Asian people, this is not just for Black people, it's not just for queer people, um, and it's not just for your middle class people who have time to you know, think about these things. Yeah, I think that getting that consciousness, I think, is going to be quite key, hopefully, in the future.
I mean, that is another thing that I think this month has been kind of interesting with, well, I guess this week actually, with Israel and Palestine, just the past few days, the events there and the bombings, because that is something, again, that I think in the 60s and 70s, just talking about the brothers or sisters in Palestine, solidarity, that was just more of an accepted rhetoric. And in the past, like maybe I don't know, 10 years, it's just been so taboo to even mention Palestine. Like when Bernie Sanders said that thing about Palestinians deserve human rights or something very
Mhm.
like so basic.
Yeah.
It was like such an outcry, you know, in that one of the presidential debates. So that's another thing that I don't know. We're going back, and then are we going forward? You know, it's like another thing where it just feels like a regression, but now it seems to be coming to the forefront again.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I think there is, I think there's just multiple channels where these conversations are happening. And I think, yeah, if we can look historically, right, we can pick out the things that, right, that we can show that it was solidarity, we can show, that these struggles were interconnected and people were working towards that. And then you have, the mainstream narrative, right, where that's kind of hidden.
They
I think,
squashed it. And I
yeah, and I
mean,
think
they
similarly,
jailed
that's kind of
people,
what's
they
happening now.
killed people, they smeared people. I mean, those were effective tactics.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing similar things happening right now, right? Like I think the mainstream, if you don't read the New York Times, but I think what the mainstream reporting of especially what's now happening in Palestine or any discussions about China or the Chinese government, right, is wholly troubling to me at least, in the framing. And then, but then we have independent journalists, right? We also have now we have social media, so there's people who are speaking on these matters as well, and who offer a completely different perspective. And and I think at least for me, obviously, I'm going to be seeing more of the things that I agree with. And I don't necessarily think an echo chamber is by design or by definition a bad thing, but of course I'm going to be seeing the things that I care about. So whether everyone else is seeing that, but I mean, now we have celebrities coming into these discussions as well, so maybe
but I mean, I think
that
that the fact is, like, if you want to be informed, you can be. Like, now, if there's an area that you feel ignorance about, you can do a Google search and then probably spend like 5 hours trying to sort through what's credible. But at least you have that option, right?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the topic as well, yeah, no, you're right. But I think it's difficult, right? Because like I think to find writing or to find sources that aren't biased in any way, or aren't overly biased, or aren't overly, let's say, US imperialist, is extremely difficult. So anything you read has a certain political agenda and framing to it. And I think that's where just practicing like critical like thinking and things like that come in really helpful. But yeah, it's still, I think it could still be quite challenging.
So what would I kind of want to hear Wei's perspective about this, because he's been in the UK this whole time, and then your perspective about the top 3 things like that we should be dealing with.
In the UK?
Well, in the US maybe for you, and then what do you think, Wei, for in the UK?
Oh my God, that's really putting me on the spot.
It's really, I should have
Jesus
given you
Christ.
5 hours.
Okay, I'm not going to give you the top 3 things, because whatever I say, they'll obviously
Just the first 3 that come
the
to
first
mind,
thing that comes to
maybe.
mind.
Yeah.
The first thing, that's so much pressure. Yeah, and class solidarity, anti-racism, transphobia.
So what do you mean by class solidarity? Let's just tackle the first one.
So I think we were just chatting about it before, but obviously I think there are 2 aspects to social justice, which is like not 2, but you have the class aspect and then you have the identity politics aspect. And the identity politics aspect has entered the mainstream, but is somehow a little bit diluted on the class solidarity side. So, and the reality is that you can't really achieve racial equality without addressing structural issues that affect class. So I think that's important. Transphobia is really sucks in the UK. Really sucks.
I think we are behind, actually, the US.
Yeah, I think we're behind the US, which is really interesting, because you can't even get an abortion in the US, but somehow the trans healthcare could be better than ours. So here,
I don't know actually about that. We should definitely do a whole podcast about that.
The problem with the US is that each state has a lot of
and they've rolled back some stuff
in many states
recently. Yeah. So maybe we should do a whole
episode
on that.
Let's save that for another time, because I could really rant on it, but just turfism and
I'm there's so many areas of that I'm so curious about and have questions about, and let's definitely do that. But back to your class thing, I
Mm.
do have a question about that in terms of, have you heard the term class reductionist?
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm like on the fence about that
Hmm.
because, so for me, I just wonder if I am a class reductionist, but the
Hmm.
thing that I sort of object to when people talk about it
Hmm.
is that there seems to be like no acknowledgement of racism and how it factors in.
Hmm.
But like the people that I've heard of who identify like who identify as class reductionists, like Adolf Reed Jr. probably, um, he acknowledges racism.
Hmm.
He just doesn't like, he's like, it's a given, it's obvious, you know,
Hmm.
it is there. It's just
Hmm.
that's not where our solutions come from. And so I'm inclined to agree with that. But he also really downplays representation. Like he's like, I don't give a fuck if like
Hmm.
black people win Oscars, for example. Like that's
Hmm.
not where his like focus is. So you
Yeah.
know,
I feel that's a bit reductive.
haha.
That's
But
why it's called class reductionism.
yeah, but so what do you think the like what are the pros for it though? I mean, I think that for me the reasons the case for it is that
Hmm.
I like for example when that video leaked of Biden talking to civil rights leaders.
Hmm.
Did you catch that one? And they were talking about real things like um, police
Yeah,
brutality,
sure. Yeah.
etc. And he was like, "But um, look at the what was the term? The amount of like multiracial commercials we have, or
For
something."
sure. Yeah. I mean, look, that's completely, empty, a very empty point to make. Although, like, let people of color do appreciate representation. Let's be real about that. And queer people and trans people do appreciate representation. So let's recognize that. But for sure, it isn't. It can be an empty gesture if there is representation in an ad or something like that, and there's no policy to address structural inequality and wealth inequality in race and gender. But I think the accusation of class reductionist, you can level it at someone. I mean, especially in left-wing movements, there does exist significant racism and significant misogyny, right? So, and to not acknowledge that dimension, I think is not helpful.
Yeah, I
Um,
think really the answer here is just intersectionality, right? Like
yeah,
recognition that class is a factor, recognition that race is a factor, recognition that all the aspects of our identity is a factor. And then when trying to think about solutions or trying to think about how we can support other identities or other yeah, people that are affected by, the different types of repression, that we recognize that and that we center that, right? We don't, while we all want the same things, which is like safety, security, and education for everyone, the way that we achieve that is different depending on the communities that we're advocating for, that we're showing solidarity with. And yeah, I think Wei, to your point, yeah, I think appreciation or representation is very different to what we're asking for, right? So for example, yeah, it's nice to have more Asian representation, but in terms of what Asian activists or Asian community leaders are asking for, it's not really that. That can be a nice byproduct
mhm,
of recognition of our struggles, but
mhm,
what we really want is making sure that we're lifting the Asian populations that are in poverty out of poverty, and that we're not facing like real discrimination in our daily lives, right? And yes, representation just by nature will become part of that, right? Once we're less discriminated
But
against.
also, I do think that representation helps with humanizing,
yeah,
like
exactly.
genuine representation.
Absolutely.
So, therefore, suddenly these communities are allowed to live, allowed to dream,
Right.
etc.
Yeah.
So I don't think that can really be, and so that's probably why I'm not a class reductionist, although
How
I
are you supposed
do.
to get a good job if people just see you as useless, or whatever stereotype it is that
Yeah, or lazy or dumb or whatever.
or if
Like,
people are transphobic, how is a trans person supposed to get a job, if that hasn't if that
yeah, if you're just
dimension of
considered
identity
scary
hasn't
or
been
something.
addressed, then people just laugh at you when you get in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. But then it can be weaponized in a way that is so dangerous. I
For
mean, I
sure.
think
For sure.
that having Biden as like now president, but at the time that when he was chosen as the Democratic candidate, was like kind of the apex, I guess, of that year in terms of like protests, Black Lives Matter protests and stuff like that. And then it's kind of like a huge slap in the face to be like, and here's Kamala Harris, your representation.
Mm.
She is Black. And plus,
Mhm.
she's Asian. So she
Mhm.
kind of covers everything. And a
Multiple
woman.
boxes.
And a woman, yeah, they got a 3-in-1. So
Yeah.
Right.
So
But what
that's
does
kind
that
of
mean?
dangerous.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I feel that was really dangerous because it just covered. And I know so many people actually who posted on social media with great abandon while the protests were going on, and then posted with the same amount of like, I don't know, cheerleading with Kamala Harris, like with no sense of irony between those two.
on representation, actually, Jess, you had an interesting point about Andrew Yang.
Oh yeah, and Andrew Yang's another one.
Don't talk to me. Oh my goodness, Andrew Yang, what the
Yeah.
fuck are you doing? Yeah, no, we no longer claim him, right, surely as a as a representative for us. Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, and like, right now we have this concept of like, like pick me girls or like pick me guys, like people who pander to, their target audience or like their target romantic interest. And yeah, I think Andrew Yang is a pick me Asian, like very, an
Yeah.
agent of white supremacy,
Mhm.
essentially. Right, like, his statements before about how, we should all or at least Asian Americans should be, proving how American they are, and
Through acts of service.
yeah.
Through acts of service.
What acts of the service? Like joining the military?
Yes, yes.
Oh
so,
my
so
God.
he basically referenced like World War II or Vietnam, I can't remember, but he basically had this black and white photo and was like, I think it was, and he was kind of like, in XYZ year, Japanese Americans proved that they were American by by fighting for their
Oh my
country or
God.
something like that.
And then
Yeah.
being interned?
Why
Crazy.
Yeah.
do we have to prove that we are part of the country that we are citizens of because we're a different race?
Yeah.
That's and just being extra nice to white people, presumably, like really, really disgusting comment from Andrew Yang.
I mean, my thoughts on Andrew Yang was, apart from UBI, which seemed to be the only thing, and actually decriminalization of drugs, which I thought was an interesting stance to take. But basically, the UBI thing was his answer for everything. He just seemed incredibly ignorant about every other issue.
Right, but when we asked, when people asked where the UBI money would come from, it was to cut,
It was
funding
regressive
for like other social
taxation,
services and things
was
like
it?
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Which is
know.
stupid. Yeah. So yeah.
Don't vote Andrew Yang if you want.
I mean that's kind of the problem too, is that I think back to the class reductionist argument, just the idea of voting for someone because of their race is such a problem, because what are their policies really?
Yeah, and it's actually a like a modern and like wrong interpretation of what identity politics is. So identity politics began again, as a Black feminist term to say that, you advocate for policies that affect your identity, not your identity means that you are a good advocate for other people in your community. So now, now we've kind of taken the substance of that meaning, right? Which is, yes, people who are Black or, you know, Indigenous or queer, right, and they advocate for the things that affect them because that's their lived experience, right? That's what they know, and they're the best people to advocate for the things that affect them. Now it's turned into, right, Kamala Harris is biracial, Kamala Harris is a minority woman, therefore, you know, we must vote for Kamala Harris, right? Or Andrew Yang is a very prominent, you know, Asian politician, therefore Asians should rally behind him, right? But you know, their policies though
It's
are to not
used.
actually advocate for the community at all, right?
Yeah, it's been used in that way, like instead of listening to, but again, it's that whole thing of like blaming the voter for voting against their own interests. And therefore, you know, um, giving them this superficial representation or tokenism or symbolism of, you know, who they're supposed to vote for.
Mm.
But so back to your policy or your top 3 issues / policies, what are they?
God, I mean, for
Well,
the
first
US,
3, yeah.
for globally.
Wait,
First
and
3.
yours, Wei, was class, transphobia, and anti-racism.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, pretty standard.
Pretty standard. But I
Pretty
guess like
standard.
the question would be, how would, I'm sorry, as Jess, you're formulating your thoughts. I'm just thinking, but how would these things apply, like in the UK, in terms
In
of
the UK, I
policy?
mean, for example, some people didn't know this, but conversion therapy was only just on the table as being banned. So it's been gay conversion therapy is legal. I believe there was a Queen's speech last week. So Her Royal Majesty intervened and said, like, alluded to conversion therapy being banned. Obviously, I'm joking, she didn't intervene, but she alluded to it.
She's not allowed to intervene.
Yeah, she's benevolent. So that's pretty shocking. And also, you can't even get a non-binary passport in the UK. So the medical route and the administrational route to trans rights is there are so many things that so many blockers and in the way. And I think, I mean that there is just a significant movement, anti-trans movement in the UK that has a lot of power. Infiltrates the BBC, is part of the NHS, and spreads false narratives. So I think that, for example, in concrete ways, legislation needs to change.
Are there any political parties right now that seem to be sympathetic to this?
God.
All right.
There was a party that came up on my TikTok the other day, like
Wow.
the women's.
Oh, the women's equality one?
Let's look at it. Maybe am I? Yeah, Women's Equality Party. Here we go. Set up in 2015. And yeah, they have said, obviously I haven't looked into them at all, but they did say that they are, trans women are women.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, although, you know, I think this is a bit maybe of like, I guess, gender reductionism, right? You know, I don't really, in their 2-minute TikTok like commercial that I saw, they're like, you know, don't you think it would be better if women were in charge? And it's like, no,
Oh,
I don't think it's better
no.
if women are in charge. I think it's better for people.
Haven't we had that with Theresa May, apparently? Margaret
More
Thatcher?
women bombing Syria.
Yeah, exactly. Woke woke bombing. That's exactly what we need.
Yeah, so I hesitate a little bit there, but you know, you're right. Any party that says at the outset that, you know, at least they're inclusive is a good start. You know,
I guess that's a good start, but I really do hate that because that came up a lot during like Hillary, you know, like, oh, she's a woman, blah blah blah, and it's
like the whole girl boss empowerment lean in, you know, the white feminist.
But it's also like you have to listen to what people actually say. Like, you know, you don't just look at their faces. And she's just, so I'm really kind of against that sort of superficial tokenism.
Yeah, I think it's done a lot of harm. You know, if you think about mainstream feminism in the last, I don't know, like 5 to 10 years, right? The amount of time and attention that was spent on getting women into the boardroom, or women CEOs, or like have a killer career.
Mm.
It was completely inaccessible and
Mm.
not desirable for so many women, and really not the main issues, right? I mean, gendered violence is still rampant, without that focus, it's just it's completely meaningless, and it completely, again, it's very classist, and it excluded women of color.
Mhm.
So, and I think it really sets us back, because I think it made people think that, oh, look, women are getting their day now, so cool.
Yeah, and then the whole listen to women thing got moved from actual victims of violence and rape into just listen to like Elizabeth Warren every time she says something. It's like, what? It's like crazy.
Yeah.
So easily derailed, I think. Um, now that we've had that little digression, well, not a little digression, but an important subject, what would you say your talks, your first come to mind issues or policies that you would like change?
Yeah, I think really in doing more of this work, and trying to formalize this, I think a lot of these things are at the global level, right? Like if we look at policing and like the prison industrial complex, obviously in the US there's a lot of money and resources tied into that structure, but I would say globally, right, policing is a massive problem, right? Globally, policing is used to defend either corporate interests or to defend property, and often used against the population, right? To silence and to basically inflict violence upon them. So I think that is something that happens everywhere, right? In the UK, it's not as violent, because, well, it's not as, I guess, on the face violent, because police officers don't tend to have guns, but they still act in a very similar way to how US law enforcement acts. So I think
Yeah.
dismantling that is
Like the
key.
Bristol riots, I
Hmm.
guess that happened like a few months ago.
Yeah,
It was
in Bristol.
extremely
Yeah,
violent. And even
yeah,
the
and
one about Manu, which I mean, part of me was laughing, but then at the same time, that's just so terrible, like that they were using actual physical violence against these fans.
Yeah, and even I think there's a case going on right now, a trial going on right now. I don't know if it's still happening, but yeah, I think a person died in police custody, and so these things are happening, and I think there's been many deaths, over the last how many years, but not a single conviction as of yet in the UK. So, we can't. I don't think we can really say that none of those
No,
deaths
no.
or all of
But
them
I
were
do
warranted.
wonder about the scale, just because like
Absolutely.
in LA, like during the protest last year, it came out that the budget for LA was 56% or over 50%
Mhm,
for the police,
mhm.
which is just a ridiculous amount. So that's why they have like helicopters and like military weapons,
Yeah.
etc. But I wonder what the budget is in the UK. Like that's something I guess
Yeah,
you
I
have any
assume
idea?
less, but I think part of the issue is that, it's not just about, the violent incidents, or like the incidents that result in death, right? The thing with, structural racism or structural oppression is that it affects everyone's daily lives, and, you're traumatized by that, and, we shouldn't, just only focus on the real extreme instances, right? Like that is the system acting, to its most violent end. What is happening every day is the structural racism and the structural oppression, right? That marginalized people have to struggle with, and that affects their mental health, and that affects their opportunities, right? As Wei mentioned earlier. So I think, even if we're not seeing, people getting beat up or being shot in the street, I think institutionalized racism, regardless of what the government says, is real, and it's affecting people, and it's a massive problem in the UK, right? Because we haven't come to terms with our colonial past and our racist past, and if you don't recognize, that it exists, then how can you fix it? How can you?
I mean, I really thought we had, and then that stupid race report came out like
Mhm.
last month or something that said that UK is not
Oh my
racist,
God. Mm.
and we're just laughing stock of the world.
Gaslighting a
Uh,
whole nation, yeah.
and who's believing that report? I guess.
Well,
White
I
people.
think people who don't live in cities, people. It's like they knew what they were doing. They released it knowing that people in London, people in Manchester, Liverpool would find it absolutely
Ridiculous.
abhorrent.
Right.
But what they're trying to do is appeal to people outside of that, so in rural areas and things like that, who who are their base and are maybe not so bought into, as you call it, identity politics. Let's not like get back into that, but yeah. So yeah, it like they knew what they were doing. They're trying to win over a certain demographic. They knew that they would be criticized, and it's just
They didn't
disgusting.
care.
Yeah.
Okay. So mainly intersectionality and solidarity is other things that you're focused on. And how do we further that? Like what?
Yeah, so I think we've come to an interesting point in the movement. There was an article I read a while back that was the title was, give white people something to do. And and I think, something that, I think people on the ground or have been on the ground, at least maybe in the States, are sensing. I think it's a little bit different over here, right? Because, there's still the movement to kill the bill. And, I think that is still quite necessary. And obviously, Palestine solidarity, like marches and Colombia solidarity marches and things like that.
Wait, just back up and explain to me to kill the bill. Which bill?
So there is a new bill, and I haven't been like fully focused on it because there are too many things to focus on. But essentially, a bill was trying to get through Parliament, which basically increases policing and increases criminalization, I think, of traveler and Romani communities. And I think it also had laws where vandalism of statues carried like a harsher penalty. Essentially, just more as like a law and order bill, right? More enforcement and less. And I think measures also affected protesting as well, right? I think it's like a gathering of more than X number of people, right?
Yeah,
becomes
which is
the permit or
insane.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it is
blatant attempt to restrict
aggressive.
our rights to protest. So obviously the people are fighting against it by protesting, and then facing police brutality. So which is it's always what happens, right? If you protest something that directly challenges the institution, you're going to be met with violence. And that's why I think the marches for Asian lives, all that they weren't met with aggression and violence because we weren't, or those folks weren't directly challenging those institutions, right? We're just saying like, hey, or like at least the theme was like, hey, just pay attention to Asian people. So they didn't view that as a threat, versus the Black Lives Matter movement, which is essentially just saying Black lives matter, right? Not even are better or should be. It's like literally like, can we just matter? And no, right? The answer is no, because violence. So
because the structure is formed in a way that means that Black lives don't matter. So that's why it's even saying Black Lives Matter already is defying the structural.
Defying that institution. Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, what was your question? I know I answered your what was it?
I know I interrupted you, and then now I've like gone off on a tangent, and I can't.
Kill the bill, wasn't it?
But it was before that when she was talking about.
Oh yes, I think what can we do, or like how do we increase solidarity? Yeah.
Gee, just like a little question. Why did I forget?
I think what these movements and I think what protesting does, right, is really raise awareness for the things that maybe people. I mean, I hate to say, oh, maybe I didn't know, but sure, better late than never, come to the cause. Right, raising awareness. And I think now we're at a point where, like, at least for, I think, BLM and Black Liberation, at least the awareness aspect is quite saturated. I think it would be quite inappropriate for someone to say, well, I don't know anything, you can be ignorant on the details, and you can still.
I mean, to be honest, I found that ridiculous last year as well. Like, I felt like I was being gaslit, and I wasn't, even the subject of any of the protests, but just this idea of like people suddenly going like, oh my God, racism's a thing. It was just so
Yeah.
Weird.
I
Like,
think
let's have uncomfortable conversations about racism. It's like, hello, have you never spoken about racism in your life?
Yeah.
yeah. I think when thinking about these things a lot, a framing that has helped me is right in kind of not getting bogged down with frustration or anger at individual people is, reminding myself that these are systems of oppression that we're fighting, and these systems are actively perpetuated, right? Especially in the
Right.
US, right? There's a machine working to make sure that we don't engage in these issues, to make sure that we don't know the answers or the facts, right? To make sure that we don't have an understanding, and that is deliberate. And and I think there's a obviously, everyone's responsible for their own words and actions. But I think there is an element of ordinary everyday folks having to fight against that. And I think it helps at least if you're trying to advocate for things that you care about. It helps you then to focus on the important things, right, rather than like condemning people because they haven't reached the same conclusion that you have. Uh,
But
Although that
that,
is
I
not to say
mean, I
it's not
think, yeah, I
ridiculous.
mean, it was just my own frustration, and
Hmm.
yeah, I acknowledge that. But I think it was coupled with that book, White Fragility, which
Mm.
I
Hmm.
feel very much falls into what you're saying. It's like very much pointing fingers, patting yourself on the back, and
Hmm.
then no suggestion for discussion. It's just like, if you're white, just sit down and shut up. And it's
Mm.
like, that's so unhelpful. How are we going to get to any solidarity? How are we going to get to any understanding if it's just like, she says parts in that book really disturbed me, because it was like, it doesn't matter if you have lived in Japan and you know what it's like to be a minority. You're still racist. And it's like, yes, I understand that. That's true. We're all kind of a little bit racist, but
Hmm.
it's like, are you telling me that none of your experiences change anything? Like, you can't have any sort of further understanding of racism or empathy, or it just felt
Hmm.
very like,
Yeah.
about like weaponizing identity politics in a way that
Interesting.
was not going to help
Yeah.
anybody.
I haven't read the book, obviously, but I think what it's something that a Black collective that I follow in Uganda, who speak on kind of white saviorism a lot, and they were saying, yeah, copies of her book skyrocketed, and most people were buying her
Awful.
book, and it's almost ironic. I mean, they were quite upset about it. I'm not sure if I'm that upset about it, but it's something I've been thinking about. Right, this white woman has earned a shit ton of money for writing about whiteness and racism, and whether that's fair or not, and and there was questions into, well, what is she doing with this money? And I think that kind of speaks to, right, she wrote a book, obviously that's doing something, but now she's profiting from the racism against Black people, right, that she has captured in her writing. So what are the next steps for her? How can she now
I mean,
further
she always
contribute?
did. Like, she wrote the book based on her experience as a corporate consultant on
Mhm.
racism. So, and she charged like like $6,000 an hour or something crazy like that.
Hmm.
So she's always been profiting off this subject matter.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think the part that is, I think, cathartic for people while reading that book is that
Mhm.
to read it and then to go, oh my God, this is why my white friend could not admit to race. Like that
Mhm.
idea of like, how many times have I said something is racist and they just did not listen? That part I totally understand,
Mhm.
why you would want a book that's just like, hello, this is why you're racist. Like,
Hmm.
Yeah.
it was helpful in that way. But now I can just see that sort of rhetoric being weaponized in a way
Yeah.
that's not
I
helpful.
mean, I think we can recognize the limitations of um, just caring about diversity, and if we
Right.
take it as just a corporate diversity book,
Yeah. It's
or
a
a book
corporate
yeah,
cover
it's
book, like a shield for corporations. They've now done anti racist training,
mm,
so it's harder to sue them, that sort of thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
mm. But I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean, look, I think corporate diversity is a good thing within the scope of corporate culture. It
It's
doesn't address
needed, right?
anything. It
It's
doesn't address
necessary.
anything else, but like, sure. I think corporate diversity is better than not corporate not diversity.
Right.
You know,
Well,
it's not.
but
I don't think it addresses a lot of things. I think it has its limitations, but
yeah, because corporations tend to forget the inclusion part, right?
mhm,
You have a okay enough pipeline, and they come in, and then you don't address the toxic, work
mhm,
environment, and then
mhm,
you traumatize your marginalized workers, so then they leave, and then you're like, oh no, why did they leave? I thought, we're getting them in, and then you don't address that issue, right? Which is the more pertinent issue. I think any company that says that they can't, I mean, it's harder, it's definitely harder to find marginalized candidates just for various reasons, for various roles, right? It's harder, but you put
mhm,
in the effort. So I'm quite suspicious of any corporation
mhm,
that says they can't find diverse candidates. But
mhm,
then once they're in, right, then that's when the real work begins, right? How do you prevent microaggressions? How do you, right, prevent like actual overt racism? Like how
mhm,
do you prevent bias in promotion, hiring, things like that? And I think that is where a lot of corporations struggle, because they don't even think about those things. um, and yeah, and in terms of what people can do, I think the way that a lot of things in Rights for Rights works, is it's not just about thinking about these concepts, or disseminating these concepts, right? It's like, how do we apply them to our daily lives, right? Because what we have found, and I think what everyone will recognize, is that these systems are not just created by the government. They're not just created by your kind of local, or like a big corporation, right? Any kind of social interaction, or any kind of social group, these systems come into play. And as much as an organization of people who are passionate about changing the world, or passionate about affecting change, these systems are so ingrained into our minds that they crop up even internally. So I think recognizing that and noticing that, and then saying, okay, what are the things that we can do to prevent that from happening, right? So where everyone has space to do the work that they want to do, right? To volunteer for the things that they want to do, but also then acknowledging this like power dynamic, acknowledging these like different structures that come into play. And so for example, we have progressive stacking whenever we were in a meeting, right? Which is depending on who, it's like an order of who raises a hand, right? But and I think this happened in the Occupy movement as well. But depending on your identity, right, you get to speak first, because your voice has probably in other spaces, right, been silenced, or not been acknowledged.
So what does
Yeah.
like a lay person do? Like a
Mhm.
tangible thing an
I
average
think
person can do?
honestly, get involved in your community, right? Like it's not about getting elected into office, or like pushing for policies, or like really understanding the large scale problems, right? Just really get involved in your community. And I think especially since COVID, and especially I think since like at least in the US, in the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Like there's it's not just protesting and being out in the streets, right? It's like it's really saying if we do say we want communities to have a say in how they're governed, or to have a say in what they need, then go to those communities, and speak with them, right? And it's not going in, especially if you come from a position of privilege, right, whether that's wealth, or your race, or whatever. It's not to say I'm here to help you, like I'm here to
Save you.
save you from yourself. It's more like, what can I do to help, right? So at least with writers, and for a lot of other organization that maybe started as protest organizations, right? They do a ton of mutual aid, like bringing supplies, like in New York, at least, there's a ton of community fridges, free food for everyone, and like working with other people who can provide goods and services, right? And then distributing them across your communities is a really powerful thing to do. And then, if you are in an organization, or if you're already in, and not even just like an activist organization, right? In your workplace, if you really believe that work needs to be done to elevate, marginalized voices, then do that. If you're a hiring manager, right, make sure that your hiring policies are fair, and that you're looking out for unconscious bias, right? In a room, in a meeting, right, if you notice that like someone is not speaking up, and they're a woman, or they're like a marginalized person, like speak up, or like, yeah. make sure, right, that you're elevating their voice. And then, you know, at least in riders, you know, there's a lot of work that is divided up, right? And then, you know, the more privileged people will do the work that's maybe not as visible, you know, will help with the operations, and, you know, or not help, but like, you know, really sometimes really steer the operations side and the admin side of the organization, right? Which is critical to our work, right? Because otherwise it kind of all falls apart, right? Like doing the work that might not be visible, but is still crucial. And yeah, just making sure that you're not taking up just too much space, and, you know, just being conscious of that. You know, I think it's difficult for like white cis men to do because they've never had to be deferential. So I think it maybe takes maybe more of like a mental effort in the beginning. But I think, you know, for a lot of like marginalized people, it comes more naturally because we've always had to have an element of, you know, that in our daily lives. So yeah, I think, you know, regardless of the spaces that you're operating in, you know, I would say definitely try to be more involved in community things, and then in those spaces, right, being aware of your contribution and, you know, where you can really elevate other people, right, to your level, or even should above you, right, especially if it's the work is like community work. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time and your intelligence and articulation and everything.
oh, thank you both for having me. That was really fun, and hopefully gave some ideas of how to, you know, be how to be either show up for solidarity, or just how to show up and in spaces wherever you want to be. So
little outro. So what did you think of our conversation? How did you think we did as a conversation?
Great. I mean, I enjoyed it. I don't know if it's going to make any sense, you know, like when people listen back to it, but it makes sense to me. So that's a good start. I'm sure if I was to do it more regularly, then I would have a bit more control, metacognition on like where the conversation goes.
Do you think so? I don't know. We'll revisit this. We can revisit this in like 10 episodes and be like, have we improved our skills?
Yeah. Or at least a rapport, you know, like.
Because we lack a rapport right now. We have developed a rapport.
Yeah, we've had our entire lives to develop a rapport.
And we just somehow didn't work until we started this podcast. Yay. Okay.